Nothing in this podcast is meant for medical advice. Please discuss your own healthcare with your healthcare providers. Thank you. Welcome to your B-side, your midlife metamorphosis. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Midlife is not a crisis, it's a catalyst to your best life. Join me each week for a dose of mental, physical, and spiritual health, life, grief, adventure, and opportunity. It's time to flip the record over. Welcome to your B-side, your midlife metamorphosis with me, your host, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Today we're going to talk about why 1 in 3 marriages in midlife, around 50 to 60 years old, often end in dissolution. Midlife changes mean there's going to be changes to your relationship. I think that this is obvious, but it becomes apparently so when we add menopause to the mix. So you may have experienced this personally, or you may feel like you're on the brink of experiencing this, but absolutely, without a doubt, if you are in a long-term committed relationship, married or not, but if you're married and you are approaching midlife hormonal transitions, you will notice a change in how you relate to your partner. Now, as you know, I'm a big advocate for talking also about andropause, which is the male-bodied version of menopause. So there are hormone changes and mental health changes and physical changes going on for not just female-bodied people, also male-bodied people. But menopause does get most of the attention. Okay, so what's going on here? Is it just the longevity and the long-term nature of the relationship? No. There is something very specific that is going on here, specific to midlife metamorphosis, menopause, andropause, and your marriage or your long-term relationship. So at this point in your relationship, whether you are on your first marriage and you might be feeling like you're hanging on, that you're in this long-term committed relationship and it's your first marriage, and then by midlife, it starts to crack, right? That the cracks start to grow, and if you're in a boat, the water's coming in and you're starting to shovel the buckets of water out. You might feel like you're sinking. And if you are on your second marriage or on your third marriage, you might be surprised to think that things are going astray in midlife in your long-term relationship or marriage because you think that you solved the problem when you married a different person. But what you're experiencing is same song, different verse, okay? You've got a different person that you're married to, but you're still experiencing that there is a change happening in the relationship, and you're wondering if it's you, if it's them, if it's the way you do relationship, or if there's something going on in long-term relationships that maybe you can only hold on for a certain amount of time. You add in the midlife transition and you are pouring gasoline onto this fire unless you handle it with an intentional, growth-minded way. So let's talk a little bit about long-term mature relationships. So what's going on in long-term mature relationships is it's very different than, young love or shorter relationships. Usually in young love and shorter relationships, you are focused on sending your representative out, right? That you are trying to be this perfect lover, this perfect partner. You're constantly spending all this energy putting your best foot forward. Maybe you're in love and you're Twitter-pated and you're excited and love is all exciting. And you're both doing this, okay? Both of you are doing this. You're putting your best foot forward. You're sending your representative. You don't want them to see the darker side of you. You don't want to see them to lift up the carpet and look underneath. You're kind of living in this world of what you want to be, not who you are. And there's nothing wrong with that, projecting who you want to be into the world. We should all be doing that. But then we got to do the deep work of truly acknowledging who we are. And when you have young love like that, and I don't just mean by age, I mean that it's a younger relationship, you don't quite get to the part of that maturity where you not only are dragging the baggage from your whole life, okay, not just old relationships, but you're dragging in the baggage of your whole life. You're dragging in the patterns and behaviors and thoughts and belief systems from your childhood and from where you grew up, right? Like patterns and family systems. You're bringing in culture from your family system. You're bringing in life experience, but then you're also bringing in experience with other relationships. Okay. And at some point, all of that is going to come to the surface, right? And you can kind of get away with like not letting all of it come to the surface when you're in a younger relationship. But once that relationship matures, yeah, all of your baggage is on the table. The other thing about being in a long-term relationship is that you also have baggage from the relationship itself. Does that make sense? So how many people have had the experience where they're in an argument and you start bringing up old arguments, right? And you just like you're chasing your tail. You're just going in circles because you're bringing up old arguments. Well, this is what happens in mature or long-term relationships and long-term love is that you've got the baggage of your past, the baggage of all of your past relationships, and then the baggage of the relationship itself. Okay. In midlife, when you go through these hormonal transitions, it's not just a physical game. It's not just a physical transition. It is a mental transition. And in fact, it is the biggest game of mental health Olympics you will ever play. Midlife is so special, and I say special because of this. It is magic. And so while we're talking about relationships and marriage, try to remember to have gratitude for this because the only thing constant is change. And then in midlife, it seems like the change is coming at you at record speeds. And this impacts your relationships with other people, but especially if you're in a partnership. So first, have gratitude for this, because here's what happens. If you've ever experienced menopause and perimenopause, and if you are a male-bodied person and you're just listening to my podcast and starting to understand for the first time that you might go through something called andropause, give yourself a little grace that these hormonal changes then impact everything in your physical health and your mental health at the same time. And what starts to happen is a lot of people say the mask comes off, right? That when you don't have the same levels of hormones you've always had and they start to change and shift and ebb and flow or even decline, then the mental health piece is that you no longer can tolerate the bullshit that perhaps you've been tolerating your entire life up till this point. So imagine how that impacts a relationship. So let's talk about women specifically, cis women in heterosexual relationships for a second. I'm a cis woman in a heterosexual relationship. I have a lot of experience with this myself, but I also have a lot of clients with this, and there's been a lot of research about this. So what happens in menopause is cis women will begin to stop tolerating bullshit in their lives. Like they can't do it anymore. They start to snap. It shows up as irritability first. So often when you're in that perimenopausal, menopausal transition, it shows up as irritability first. It doesn't show up necessarily as a hot flash, okay, or a missed period. It shows up as irritability. And so imagine being in a long-term relationship. Suddenly you're super irritated at your spouse or at your partner. And then it starts to show up as frustration. Then it starts to show up as annoyance. And then that wedge of disrespect begins to form, that you stop respecting your partner. But here's what's happening. What has been modeled for us and what has been modeled for you most likely is steeped in misogyny, okay? And all parties are culpable. All parties are responsible for this. This isn't just like the men are responsible for this. It has been embedded into a culture and it has been modeled for us that a lot of women in heterosexual relationships will self-betray, meaning that they will betray their own needs, they will betray their dreams, they will betray everything they've ever wanted in their lives, and they will exchange that for security and safety with a man. They will exchange that to have someone else's needs to put before their own. And then don't get me started on if you have kids, right? So a lot of cisgendered women in heterosexual relationships will self-betray. And they've been modeled, right? It's not your fault, right? And then at some point it becomes your responsibility. So it may not have started as your fault, but it becomes your responsibility. By the time you get to perimenopause and menopause, you may not even identify that this is what's going on, but what you know is that everyone around you is driving you absolutely nuts. So your spouse or partner's driving you nuts, your kids are driving you nuts if you've got them, people at work, your boss, your coworkers, and part of this isn't on them. Part of it's on you, that you've been people-pleasing. You've had people-pleasing behaviors, that you have been doing things you didn't want to do. You have been doing things out of obligation. You've been doing things to get people to like you. You've been managing everybody else's lives, and you've even taken on the role of being a mother potentially to your partner. And then what develops is what I call mommy martyrdom. So whether or not you have children, you become a mother to your partner and then become a martyr to your partner. That you are doing all these things, self-betraying, and then martyring yourself. And by the time you get to that menopausal midlife transition, you can't tolerate this shit anymore. But here's the thing. Everyone needs to change, including you. That no longer do we enter into this kind of behavior, okay? And you might notice, a lot of people talk about invisible labor, okay? What happens with a lot of cisgendered women in hetero relationships is they take on what we call invisible labor, that the things you don't necessarily see physically. This is a very gender stereotype, but for example, a lot of men in hetero relationships, they take the garbage out or something, right? You see that happening. You see the garbage being taken out. And also it maybe only has to be taken out once or twice a week, right? And then there's all this managing and planning and memory storage, like how many cisgendered women in hetero relationships are the memory for the family and the memory for the relationship. They're the ones paying attention to details. They're the ones doing appointments. They're the ones managing the household. Yeah. Mind you, this is a very stereotypical setup. Regardless of what your actual roles in your domestic life are, it is important to acknowledge that what's been completely steeped in our culture has been this slow cooker steeped in misogyny that everyone is playing into, okay? When you get to midlife, you can't tolerate that anymore. Nobody can. And I don't even think that the men in these heterosexual relationships want this anymore. They don't want to be mothered by their partner. They want their partner to be their lover. They want their partner to be their partner, right? And I think that's what everybody wants. But it's slow. It's like this slow build over time. So that's going on. So let's talk about, regardless if you are in a hetero relationship or you are a cisgendered person, when you are in a long-term relationship, something will start to snap. Something will start to snap. And often what's behind that is self-betrayal. That there is something in your life that you are not doing for yourself, that you are not growing through, you are not building, you are not going through your own metamorphosis for the better, for your own self-healing journey, for your own growth, right? And you start to snap. Hey, this is Dr. Amy Lindsey, your host of Welcome to Your B-Side, your Midlife Metamorphosis YouTube channel and podcast. If you want to be more involved with my B-Side community, you can join on School. That's SKOOL. You can join my school community. Look me up, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Welcome to your B-side and request to join. Often people look at relationship as the other person is supposed to make them happy. When we enter into relationships, whether that's conscious or subconscious, there's this idea that you find someone to make you happy. But that's the first and biggest lie of a relationship. And it starts to become extremely apparent by the time you get to midlife. You start to realize, hey, this person is not making me happy. And a mature, nuanced approach is to understand that that was never their job, that your partner isn't supposed to make you happy. That's not their job. Your job is to attend to your happiness. That's your responsibility. So when your relationship is starting to implode or the cracks are starting to surface, it's often self-betrayal, okay? That someone is self-betraying and that our relationships become this mirror and we start like projectile vomiting all of our unhappiness onto the other person, okay? So the first step is to take responsibility for your own self-betrayal over a long period of time. And you know what? There's many reasons why people do this. It usually has to do with safety. And sometimes people are not fully expressed in their relationships because of safety, that they're scared the other person's going to leave if they actually finally say the thing that they meant to say, that they've been wanting to say, that if they actually express their needs and their desires and started to chase a dream in midlife, that this person would leave. But I'm telling you, if you don't, you will die a soul death and also your marriage will fail. So the only way forward is to start owning that you've been in self-betrayal. So let's talk about a few things about how to handle this in a very practical way. The first thing is to acknowledge what kind of relationships you have in your relationship. Okay, so what do I mean by this? When you first start out in a relationship, the relationships you have might involve friendship and being lovers. Okay, maybe those are the first two relationships you have, is friendship and lovers. Then over time, long-term relationships and even shorter-term midlife relationships, there's all kinds of shit going on. You've got maybe your household managers together. If you have kids or stepkids or you have a blended family, you are now parents together. If you run a business together, you are business partners. If you have fur babies, if you have dogs or cats or other animals, you are fur parents, right? You're dog moms and dads and cat dads, right? You potentially are caregivers to one another. Maybe one of you has had surgery or has a condition, like a health condition or a mental health condition, or has something going on that needs caregiving. Maybe one of you has a cancer diagnosis and is going to chemo treatments, and the other person is managing and helping manage and advocate all the chemo treatments and the schedules with all the different doctors. Yeah. So there could be a caretaker role. Maybe you have aging and dying parents. And so now you're taking care of your aging and dying parents. Can you see how there's so many roles. When I've worked with couples, because I've done quite a bit of couple work for their health and mental health and wellness, often people can identify 12 to 15 relationships that they have going on in midlife with each other. And that's a lot to manage. And what starts to get pushed out is probably the most common one is being lovers. That's the most common one that gets pushed out first. And then simply dating each other gets pushed out. People are not spending time on just the relationship. If they do go to dinner, they're talking about their kids. They're talking about, their remodeling project on their house. They're talking, they're not talking about the things that they used to talk about that would light them up, right? So Identify all the relationships you have with your partner. That's the number one thing. That's the first thing to do. The very next thing to do is to be willing to change. Individually, each partner needs to come forward willing to change and to grow as individuals, to start doing that deep inner healing work that goes all the way back to childhood and childhood patterns and original family and culture and all the stories that they've kind of dragged forward into their life, including past relationships. Both partners have to be willing to do that. Then you've got to be willing to look at your relationship and to heal anything that you're still dragging around the baggage for in that relationship. So the willingness to grow and change as individuals and the willingness to change as a couple is paramount. Third, I would say that you start identifying the language of your nervous system when you're stressed. I can't impart how important this is enough. And frankly, if you do have kids or you're somewhat of influence to kids, if you're a coach or you're a teacher, I will just do a little sidebar here. The faster you can identify the language of your nervous system when you're stressed, the more you can help other kids that you have influence over and other people. You can identify how they respond to stress, and you can start to resolve conflict. You can start to help the mental health of kids and people around you just by understanding how they respond to stress. And then it completely changes conflict resolution. It completely changes how you see an individual. And so as adults, you may not even know what your nervous system setting is. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, but let's talk about it in terms of a relationship. So when we're stressed, you might be a fighter. Okay. You've probably heard of fight and flight. You might be a fighter. So your first reaction is to go into fight mode. Okay. That's how you handle stress. You could be someone who runs, who's a flighter. Your response to stress is to run. So think about those two in a relationship. One's coming at the other, probably very verbally. And then the other one just wants to run and hide and just shuts down. The chemistry, the chemicals are like flooding the brain and you can't hear the person. If you are those two people, take a time out. Whoever's the verbal fighter person, I'm sorry, you are going to have to get your verbal needs met later and take a time out. The best thing that you can do so that you both hear each other is to be able to argue in a calm way. And I say argue in a calm way because argument is actually great. And often when couples are in this midlife, long-term marriage or partnership, the arguments are not propelling the relationship forward anymore. They're just running in circles. It's the same shit, and everyone's just bringing up the stuff from the past. If you truly want to commit to arguing well and arguing forward and arguing in a way that propels the relationship forward and growth, then you have to do it in a calm, collect way. So you have to understand the language of your nervous system. You have to take that break. You have to give yourselves 20 minutes, come back, and in a calm way, then you can actually hear each other. Because I'm telling you right now, if you're somebody who flees, if you're the fleer person, you probably know you can't even hear what your partner is saying to you because you're so flooded with chemistry and your entire response is to leave. Some people, so those are the two main ones that people know about. There's also a response of freeze and appease. Okay. If you're a freezer, you can't even think. You're so stressed out. Does that make sense? You just shut down completely. You freeze. If you're a freezer, again, you're going to need time. You're going to need time for those stress chemistry flooding your system to taper off so that you can actually have a communication. You can have communication with your partner. Yeah. And if you have a partner who's a freezer, you got to know that about them. If you are an appeaser, okay, so here's the tricky thing. Appeasers often go into self-betrayal first and foremost and quickest. That they feel safe. So when they're stressed, your stress response is the first response to help you feel safe. Okay. Appeasers feel safe when they are people pleasing. So that usually looks like self-betrayal of needs in the moment, and then just trying to get the argument or the other person to calm down by betraying their own needs, by just saying, okay, being like the first to give in. Does that make sense? That over long term isn't going to go well for you if you are an appeaser. You will feel depressed that your needs are not being met and that you are not able to have that self-expression in your relationship. So that's the third thing I recommend is understanding. And you may even need to go to couples counseling and couples therapy to learn how to communicate, knowing what your stress response is. Okay. The fourth thing that I would say is use this midlife metamorphosis and this change that you're experiencing for that personal development and personal growth, that you really grab onto it and you really do flip the record over to your B side, that you are so willing and ready to go for whatever your purpose is in life, to align yourself with your truth and your values, and to finally go after what you've always wanted in your life. And that is sexy, right? And if you're both doing that, then you're back to that relationship part of your relationship. You're back to supporting each other's desires and dreams. You're back to expressing your desires and dreams. If you think about it, when people first get into a relationship, that's one of the main things they talk about it. They talk about, what do you want to do with your life? What does it interest you? And the idea of coming together is that there's a compatibility and an idea that you'll support each other. And then over time, what did I say in the beginning? It's that self-betrayal. Over time, we acquiesce. We acquiesce to status quo. We acquiesce to the other person in our relationship. And we often do that because we're scared they're going to leave if they find out the truth about us, or if we express ourselves and we express our needs and then we feel like the other person's going to leave. And what I say is take a page from me personally, and a lot of people that I've helped, is frequently have what I call divorceable conversations. Now that sounds scary, but it is, my spouse and I use this, and we kind of say it as a little joke, that we have to be willing to throw everything on the table in a safe conversation, in a calm, collect way where we know we're going to present each other with the thing we need to say, the truth we need to say, something we haven't been honest about, or some desire or dream that we want to chase that will impact the relationship somehow. Take it from me, I'm living in France right now. That was a divorceable conversation because it completely changed our relationship. It changed like how often we are actually living together or not. But I'm telling you, the more you can access these divorceable conversations, the more you might find that you truly do have a path forward together, and that your relationship can change, but it will change for the better. But of course, there are no guarantees, and that the more you really live into alignment of who you're supposed to be, you use this midlife metamorphosis to change individually and as a couple, you may discover that your path forward isn't as a couple anymore. It may be a path forward in a new kind of relationship together with respect. Either way, midlife is absolutely going to rock your world with change. And change is going to be coming at you a million miles an hour, not just physically, mentally as well. And of course, it will impact your relationship. This has been Welcome to Your B-Side, your midlife metamorphosis with me, your host, Dr. Amy Lindsey. Have a great week. This has been another episode of Welcome to Your B-Side, your midlife metamorphosis with Dr. Amy Lindsey. Be sure to follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.